Hi everyone, this video is part of Macquarie University's coding tutorials, and today we'll be talking about how a class can contain an array and how this can be useful in creating more complex and flexible code. We'll be using the example of a student class and an array of grades to demonstrate this concept. We'll also create some instance methods that we can use to operate on the class. First, let's create a student class. This class will have two instance variables, name and grades, where name of type string is the student's name, and grades is an array of integers representing each grade the student has gotten in each of their subjects. We'll also create a constructor for the class, which will take in two parameters, name and grades, and initialize the instance variables with these values. Now one edit we'll make to a constructor is ensuring that we sanitize the input. For example, let's say the grades array that gets passed in has a negative grade. So that we don't invalidate the whole array, we can put this down to an input error and just make that grade be 0 instead. Or if the grades array that is passed in is null, we might just want to create an empty array without any grades in it. Let's keep the name line the same, and now let's check if the grades array is null. And if it is, make this.grades be a new empty array. If it's not null, so else, let's make this.grades be a new array of the same length as grades. Notice that we have to do it in this order because we now know that grades isn't null, so we can access its length. Let's loop through the parameter grades array, and if the item at index I is more than 0, we add the item to index I in the this.grades array, else we make the item be 0 at that index. Notice that we don't return anything because this is the constructor. Take a minute to pause the video and ensure that you understand each line of code and the purpose of sanitizing the input. Also notice that when we weren't sanitizing the input, we were making a reference copy of grades, whereas now we are making an instance copy. Now that we have our student class with an array of grades, let's create an instance method that operates on the grades array. For example, we can create a method to calculate the WAM, or weighted average mark of a student. As the WAM is an average, the algorithm will add up all of the grades and then divide the sum by the number of grades. Currently, Macquarie gives WAMs that are whole numbers, so let's make the return type be an int. Let's call the method calculateWAM, and it requires no parameters as we'll be using the grades array. Inside, we first have to create a sum variable that we can use to accumulate the sum, and we'll make this an int since the sum of the grades will be an int. Let's then iterate through the grades array in the class. There's no ambiguity of which grades we mean here, since in the scope of this method we only have the instance variable, but for clarity we can still use the this keyword. Then, inside the for loop, we add each grade onto the sum using grades of I. We exit the loop, and now we simply return the sum divided by the number of items in grades. That is, grades.length. The last thing we have to consider is that we need to return an int. As we are working exclusively with ints, we know we are doing integer division. However, if the grades were floats or doubles, we would need to cast to an int. Casting to an int will round the result down, and we'll write it here just so you can see how it is done. Feel free to pause this video and try to create your own instance methods. For example, you might create a method that gets a student's highest or lowest grade. Perhaps you could make an advanced method where you can add an extra grade to the student, thinking about how arrays have a fixed size and how you will need to create a new and larger array with all of the old array's values. In a client class, let's create a student and try out the calculateWAM method. Let's call the student reference S1 as we can pass the student's actual name as the first parameter in the constructor. You can use your own name, but I'll call the student Tom. Now, for the second parameter, we need to pass in a grades array. Let's go to the line above and create an array of grades that we can pass in. We can call this array anything we like, but for simplicity, we'll call it grades. Let's assume Tom has just finished his first semester, so he's only done 4 subjects. Let's say he got 75 in the first subject, 50 in his second subject, minus 20 in the third, and 95 in the fourth. Notice here the negative shouldn't be allowed, so our constructor should make the third subject be 0 when creating the instance copy. Let's go back to the student reference we're creating and pass our new grades array as the second parameter to the constructor. Let's call the calculateWAM instance method. We'd expect the value to be 75 plus 50 plus 0 since minus 20 will be sanitized, and then plus 95. Then this needs to be divided by 4 since Tom has completed 4 subjects, so this should give us 55. Now if we print out s1.calculateWAM and then run, we see 55, showing us that our class is working nicely. We could go on to create a test class and try creating more students to ensure that there are no errors in the class we made. As an additional exercise, at this point, it would be a good idea to pause now and try draw out the memory diagram for the student S1 that we've created. We'll go over the solution in the rest of this video. Now that you've tried it for yourself, let's quickly go through some key takeaways from the memory diagram. Notice that the grades array in the student instance isn't pointing to the same array as the other grades variable. This is good, as we expected our constructor to make an instance copy. In the instance copy, the third item, which is index 2, is 0 instead of -20, which is how a constructor should sanitize the input. Finally, don't worry too much about how the string is represented in the diagram. Essentially, since a string is an object, it should most accurately be an instance that has a character array inside of it, holding each letter. This is beyond the course at the time of recording this video and is something to keep in mind. And that's it. This is what the memory diagram of the code we created in our client looks like. In this video, we've seen how a class can contain an array and how this can be useful in creating more complex and flexible code. By encapsulating the array within the class, we can easily operate on the array using methods and keep the data organized, especially when we need to collect similar data for an object. In the next video, we'll move on from classes and objects and start talking about a powerful concept called recursion. See you there.